I don't think it proves anything about collusion. I don't think there is any evidence of it. And I said, you know, when I was involved, I just didn't see a group that was organized enough. They were still trying to figure out how to hire field reps in Pennsylvania, let alone run a Tom Clancy operation with the Russians. These are just not good people, and I talk about that in the book. You know, he got talked into a lot of people that just did not deserve his trust. And it wasn't that he wasn't warned. I mean, I talked to him extensively about Mike Flynn in particular, who I thought was a problem from the moment I met him, and now has the shortest tenure of any national security advisor in history. So, listen, when you're president, you can only do so much, but garbage in, garbage out. And if you put bad people around you who are not prepared for prime time, you're not going to get good results, no matter how the president operates. When I was governor, I needed a good staff. When you're president, in the same way, you need a good staff.
So Governor, you've said a lot of really nice things about the president in the book, and not so nice about the people surrounding him. Yep. But you know, you talk about in the book a speech that the president made talking about you, saying that you knew about the road closures on the George Washington Bridge, you know, Bridgegate, which was like a very big deal for you. And then later getting a phone call. You said that was a lie. You knew nothing about it.
Yeah, it is
then
a lie.
Later getting a phone call from Corey Lewandowski basically saying Mr. Trump apologizes for that. Yep. But he lied in front of thousands of people.
Yeah, he did.
And this is something that he's been accused of throughout his presidency. Is the president an honest man? Listen,
in my dealings with him, the majority of the time, he's been an honest guy. Now, in that instance, I raised that instance in the book to show two things. One, about how intense these campaigns get. And he was angry because I'd gotten the Manchester Union leader endorsement. He wanted it. And so he wanted to lash out. Inappropriate to do. And I called him on it that night. He did that in the afternoon. That night, I went after him. In a really aggressive way. No, I didn't. What I said at the time was that Mexico was never going to pay for any wall. I think I turned out to be right. So in the end, you know, what I wanted to point out, though, was that he realized he had done something wrong. And not only did Lewandowski call my campaign manager, but then later that day, and I say this in the book, Donald Trump called me and said, listen, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. And let's not have any of this anymore, because we've known each other for too long to be engaging in this stuff. And I said, listen, if you don't lie about me, I have no reason to attack you. I'll just run my own campaign.
In the context of all these Pinocchio ratings that he gets, you know the list of sort of misleading statements that he's accused of making. You know, you got to wonder.
Well, listen, I think it shows you at times, and I say this in there, that one of his weaknesses is that he sometimes speaks on impulse and acts on impulse. And when you're in the real estate business, that's one thing. When you're president of the United States, it has a different impact and import. And so I don't think he's a dishonest person. I think sometimes, though, he acts on impulse. And I think when any of us act on impulse, it isn't always our best moment.
But, Governor, you were a former prosecutor, attorney general. Man Maria asked you about the president lying to the American people. You said in your interactions with him, he hasn't lied to you. But has he lied to the American people?
Well, listen, I mean, I think that anybody who's in public life, in political life, at times winds up, you know, interpreting the truth the way they want to see it.
But the president can't go by the George Costanza rule. It's not a lie if you believe it. He's the president of the United States.
And I would never apply the George Costanza rule to the president of the United States. But what I'd say is that I think that people want to focus a lot on that, and I understand why. And he's got to be held to a high standard as president of the United States, and I think the media and others are holding him to that standard. And it's not like the American people aren't aware that, as I've said many times, the president is a salesman. At his core, he's a salesman, and he uses that kind of hyperbolic rhetoric that a salesman uses. And in the real estate business, nobody really was concerned nearly as much about that as you are when you're president. This is still a guy who's never held a position in public life before, who is still transitioning and learning, as he did just this past week on the government shutdown and having to, you know, give in on the government shutdown. This is a different world. Politics and government is a much different world than New York real estate, and he's continuing to learn that. If he continues to get better at it, that's good for the country, because he's got to learn. And, you know,
how long do we give him, though?
Well, listen, 4 years. The American people give him 4 years. That's who they voted for. That I voted for him. That's who we elected. And by the way, as I say in the book, you know, everybody knew who they were voting for. It isn't like he's acting completely differently now than he did during the campaign. It's pretty consistent. So it's not like you can say, oh, truth in advertising. He was tweeting all the time. He was using very inflammatory language. He was being very direct in saying what he was going to do. And let's face it, on things like trade and on immigration, He's done exactly what he said he was going to do.
In the book, you talk about the Kushners, Jared Kushner in particular. After John Kelly resigned as the chief of staff last year, you decided to take yourself out of the running for the chief of staff job. Mick Mulvaney is doing it now as sort of an interim chief of staff, but there are reports that Mr. Kushner is in fact the chief of staff. Given what you've written in the book about him, how problematic is that?
Well, listen, I think it's always problematic to have family in government. Just as a general rule, whether it was Jared Kushner or whether it was, Bobby Kennedy, I just think it's a problem because there are going to be times in government where you're going to have to fire people. Sometimes because they do something wrong, sometimes because something goes wrong in their department, even if it's not their fault. It's hard to fire a family member when you have to sit with them at Thanksgiving. So I think there's reasons why that's problematic. And also, again, Jared comes from the very same background that the president does. Commercial real estate in the New York and New Jersey area. That's a great career, but it's not necessarily preparation for the intricacies of government. I think what happened during this shutdown is an example of where when you don't have the experience of knowing how to deal with people in the other party, how the legislative process really works, what's important in terms of the way to negotiate your way into those things and out of those things, we wind up with the longest shutdown in American history. That doesn't serve anybody well. It didn't serve the president well. It didn't serve the Congress well.
Is it personal between you and Mr. Kushner because of what your prosecution of his father?
It's never been personal to me. I mean, listen, I had a job to do when I was U.S. attorney. His father pled guilty to 18 counts. Pled guilty. And he was guilty of those things. Now, I understand it's his dad, and nobody would like to see their father sent to prison.
Did he ever speak to you about that?
Well, yeah, in the book we talk extensively. When I was being named chairman of the transition, he interrupted my meeting with the president, with then candidate Trump, and tried to talk him out of it and used the reason of my prosecution of his father for that. It was a completely inappropriate thing to do. But I will tell you, Donald Trump stood up at that time and just said, no, like, Chris was doing his job. You can't blame him for doing his job. You would have done the same thing if you had his job, because Jared's a lawyer. And he said, and, in the end, I need him to run the transition. But what I was told by Steve Bannon and by others over time was that the beating on me to Donald Trump by his son-in-law continued. I never saw it again after that, but I was told it continued throughout and ultimately led to my termination in charge of the transition a few days after the election.
Let me ask you, at this point now, books about the campaigning and the presidency, it's almost like a cottage industry, right? There have been a number of books out. I was really looking forward to your book because you feature in many of these books. In Bob Woodward's book, he wrote that the president thought you were a jinx because you were you wanted to work on the transition. Karma. Right? Yeah. And I wonder just what it must have been like sort of from your point of view. Because I think people watched this very robust, outspoken, direct-talking governor who then ran, who then put his support behind President Trump, candidate Trump, and it seemed like your personality changed a little to people on the outside.
I think
and some of these books sort of indicate that.
Well, but if you read my book,
yeah.
I think one of the reasons I was fired was because my personality didn't change. You see in there, I continually told the president that Michael Flynn was a problem. I was independent in running the transition. And the entire time, I've always given, to this day, I give the president my unvarnished opinion about what's going on, what he does, even during this latest shutdown.
He still asks for your opinion?
Yeah, we still talk all the time. And we've been friends for 17 years. So, this was not something where it was a political convenience that I decided after I lost that, well, I'm going to endorse Donald Trump just because, he's winning. Well, no, he was the one I knew best of all the other candidates. And I also thought that he was on the path to winning, and I wanted to help make him a better candidate. My personality hasn't changed one bit. In the end, and I think you can see from the work that I do in the media today, too, I say what I think. Sometimes it's positive about the president, sometimes it isn't. And when it isn't, he calls. So what are you saying? And I said, well, you're wrong on this one, and I'm going to say you're wrong on this one. And I've told him many times privately when I think he's made a mistake. But when I think he's right, too, I'll go out there and defend what he does. This book was written because I wanted to tell my truth. I wanted to be able to talk, not in the gossipy stuff that you see in a lot of these other books, but unlike all those other people who wrote, I'm in the room for all of this stuff. And you'll see when this book comes out, I don't think you're going to hear any denials from anybody, because what I did was go in there and tell the truth like I always did as governor and as U.S. attorney.
Would you want to be in the room again? Would you want to be part of the administration now?
I've said no to a bunch of jobs in the administration, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Homeland Security, because it's not something I want to do right now. I mean, I had 16 years in public life. I have 2 more kids to put through college. It might be time to make a little bit of money.
So Governor, you having been the governor of a state, know what emergencies are all about. Would you counsel the President of the United States to declare a national emergency at the border so he can get his $5 billion for a wall that he said Mexico would pay for?
I think it's very dubious, the idea of using that executive authority, and I don't think it would be upheld by the courts. And so when he's asked me my opinion for that, I've given it to him, which is be very careful, because when you use executive authority in a way that the courts strike down, you diminish the power of the presidency. And so I wouldn't want to do anything to diminish the power of the presidency, either for President Trump or for future presidents who come into that office. And so I think he'd be very careful about making those decisions. I think that's why he hasn't done it so far, is I think he's getting advice, not just from me, but from others, both inside the White House and outside, that says that may not work. And if you lose, you diminish yourself politically, and you diminish the power of the presidency. I think would be the wrong thing to do.
Speaking of advice giving and getting, what advice would you give to Roger Stone right about now?
Listen to your lawyers. That indictment is pretty detailed. Again, you know, it's why do people ask me all the time, why do people lie about stuff like this? And
you would think that they would know. These are people who've been around Washington for a very long time. Many of them are lawyers.
Exactly.
Lying, you don't lie to your parents. Yeah. Why would you lie to Congress?
Well, there's two reasons, right? One, because people are scared. Second, it's because they think they're smarter than they are. You know, and let me tell you something. I've known Bob Mueller for a long time. I met Bob Mueller in 2002. And believe me, he knows what they know. And more. So they best be careful in not telling the truth to Bob Mueller, because he's shown over and over again, you know, most of these cases, except for Manafort, have been about lying. They haven't been about Russian collusion. They've been about lying. That's a crime, too. And you can't lie to federal agents. You can't lie to grand juries. You can't lie to Congress. And when you do that, you need to be subject to penalty.
Let me channel my political journalist idol, Chuck Todd, and ask you here, are you going to challenge President Trump for the Republican nomination in 2020?
That's right. I can't imagine that. No, I can't imagine.
You're not going to run for president?
No, I can't imagine a scenario under which anybody challenges the president successfully in 2020. I think he'll be the nominee, and he'll have a tough race like he had a tough race in 2016. But no, I can't imagine that. I think, you know, the fact is that I ran in 2016. I'm not saying I'd never run again. I'm 56 years old, so you never know where life's going to take you. And I don't have an interest in running for any other job. I'm not someone who belongs in Congress. I was governor with the most powerful governorship in the country. Once you've had that kind of job, you want to be an executive. And I think that's where my skills are best suited. So if I get back into public life, it'll be as an executive running something, and not as a member of Congress. So who knows, but I don't see 2020.
All right. Governor Chris Christie, good luck with the book, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great to meet you both.
Good to meet you.
Thanks.